Hello again, everybody, and welcome to Monday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. It's presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. Yes, it is the Super Bowl Monday doldrums. I believe the labor force, the Labor Association in America says that over 40% of you folks call out with sickness the day after the Super Bowl. We all know that it's not necessarily illness, but just kind of either sleepiness or perhaps a little too much consumption of some things, food included.
I was going to say chicken wings.
Could be. But in any case, if you're not at work today, and you usually consume us at work, thanks for bringing us into your home. We're going to be here for the next hour. We'll talk Giants football, of course, a lot of Super Bowl chat at 201-939-4513. The thing that I'd like to try to do today, now I'm sure you folks all watch the game. I mean, who doesn't watch the game? We know that the Philadelphia Eagles absolutely demolished Kansas City in last night's game. The interesting part for me is that they are in the NFC East. And if you are the New York Football Giants and you know you have a Washington Commanders team that surged into the forefront this year, and a Philadelphia Eagles team that just captured a Vince Lombardi trophy this year, you have to be looking at the 2025 season as one that is now going to be incredibly challenging. Even if the Dallas Cowboys, with their new regime, should not rebound and struggle and have a tough season, it still means you have two very, very dangerous opponents in the division.
Yeah, and as we all know, obviously 4 games total against those two opponents. I mean, we've spoken about it, prior to today, but just looking at the Giants' home schedule next year, the only 2 teams on every game the Giants play at home next season, only 2 did not make the playoffs this year. And those 2 teams are the Dallas Cowboys, who, we expect to make some sort of bounce back, even if it's not bouncing back to a, playoff team. They're going to be better in 2025 because you would assume that Dak Prescott will be healthy. It'll be tough for them to have more injury bad luck because they lost DeMarcus Lawrence, they lost Micah Parsons, they didn't have Deron Bland for a good part of the season. I think Trayvon Diggs was hurt at some point. They could not have had worse injury luck. So you expect the Cowboys to have some sort of bounce back. And then the other non-playoff team on the home schedule is the 49ers, who, again, you expect to have a big bounce back. So, yeah, any way you look at it, the 2025 season, it's going to be tough.
I'm trying to digest my food. You're making it very difficult.
Look, I'm
just saying.
Yeah, no, I know. Look, it's not what anyone wants to hear, obviously.
No.
The Giants, they have some work to do. No one's going to.
They do.
We're not going to sit up here and try to convince you otherwise. But, it might be somewhat of a long process to get back to where everyone wants the Giants to be. But, we've seen it done before. I mean, just look at this Eagles team. Mm-hmm. Granted, yes, the Eagles won the Super Bowl in, the 2017 season, which is not that long ago in the grand scheme of things. However, since that Super Bowl win against the Patriots, they had sort of a rebuild and retool period. It started when they drafted Jalen Hurts in the second round of the 2020 NFL draft. That 2020 season, the Eagles were awful. I think they won 4 games that season. But they had their quarterback. They felt confident, or really was the 2021 season where they developed the full confidence that Jalen Hurts was their franchise quarterback. But they went into the 2021 season saying Jalen Hurts is going to be our starting quarterback at the very least for this year. And then they built the team around him. I mean, you look at the Eagles, what they did yesterday, what they did all season. The strength of the Eagles, as we all know, it lies up front on both sides of the ball. They can't do what they did on offense all season. Saquon Barkley doesn't run for 2,000 yards without that offensive line. It's a simple matter of fact. And you look at the defense, their defensive front was spectacular yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
I was baffled and just shocked when I saw after the game, Next Gen Stats tweeted, the Eagles did not blitz a single time.
Correct.
In the entire game.
Mm-hmm.
Yet Patrick Mahomes was under pressure and under duress the entire game.
They played mostly nickel, and they played mostly quarters coverage.
And that's because they were confident, and Vic Fangio was correct in thinking this way, that they could get pressure on Patrick Mahomes with just using their front four, which they did throughout the entire game. And the reason they were able to do that is because of how talented they are up front. And so, I know you said you wanted to spend some of this episode today talking about how the Giants can sort of get to where the Eagles are. Obviously, it starts with finding a quarterback, finding their version of, Jalen Hurts.
Bigger picture than that. If you look at the starting offense and starting defense for the Eagles yesterday, over 2/3 of them came through their draft.
Yes. Only 8 starters were from free agency or trades.
That's the simple answer.
Yeah,
right
yes,
there.
For sure.
You need to be able, over the course of 2 and 3 years, compile enough of good players out of your draft classes that they can not just make up the core of your team, but the bulk of your team.
No doubt about it.
That's the answer.
No doubt about it. However, all those core players you're talking about, almost all of them, I'm not talking about the, long-standing veterans that have been there for 10 plus years, but most of their core players that had a big impact on the win yesterday were drafted either in the same draft or the drafts following the selection of Jalen Hurts. Once they knew they had their quarterback, Howie Roseman was able to focus on building out the rest of the team, mostly through the trenches, especially on the defensive side of the ball, and built the team up front. Even prior to this year, the Eagles, we knew, were dominant up front on both sides of the ball. And then in this past draft, obviously last year, the Eagles were pretty weak in the secondary. So what does Howie Roseman do? Goes and spends the first 2 picks on 2 defensive backs, and all of a sudden,
and they both hit.
They both hit and helped transform that pass defense from one of the worst in the league to the very best in the league.
John and I were sitting in this room when they made those picks, and both times slammed our fists on the table and said, cannot believe that they had this guy drop into their laps. Of course, Mitchell and DeGene.
Yeah.
Both of those guys fell perfectly into the Eagles' puzzle. They were desperate for high-quality secondary. And in the first and second rounds, they were served on a silver platter.
Oh, yeah. And I remember going into the draft, I feel like going into the draft, almost everyone was predicting the Eagles would take Quinyon Mitchell because he was one of the top, if not the top corners. We knew that there would be a run of offensive players to start the draft, and just, marrying need with best player available with where the Eagles were drafting, Mitchell did seem like the likely pick. However, I don't know if anyone was expecting Cooper DeJean to drop to the second round. I think it was 40th overall to where the Eagles were selected.
At the Combine, there was a lot of debate about him potentially playing safety.
Yeah.
If you remember.
I do remember that. All offseason leading up to the draft last year. And he somehow dropped to 40, and as soon as the Eagles took him, we knew that he was going to hit because he landed with the Eagles. We knew it.
All right, so looking back for a second just at the game to understand this, their trenches were incredibly dominant. They also, and I want to make something very, very clear here, they got a really good game out of Jalen Hurts. Played extremely well yesterday. And the other part to the resurgence of the Eagles was the fact that, and we talked about this before last year's season, how the change in their coaching staff was going to hurt them. Well, it dramatically hurt them in 2023. It dramatically helped them when they changed those faces again in 2024. Kellen Moore and Vic Fangio were probably as valuable to the Eagles this year as Saquon Barkley was. Honestly. They did that good of a job in helping out Sirianni get that boat straightened out. Yes, great draft picks, not disputing that. You still have to build, by getting players through the draft. But the change in the coaching staff turned out to be a monumental flop of direction that greatly enhanced this team. And then, of course, they add the free agent running back, who was the missing piece. They rolled the dice. They paid more than anybody else was willing to pay to get a running back who is a phenomenal talent, should have been MVP of the league this year. Instead, he was Offensive Player of the Year. Fine. At least he got something. He deserved it. He absolutely deserved it. He was the missing piece. He didn't do much in the game yesterday, but boy, they don't get there without him. There's no doubt they don't come even close to sniffing that trophy. They can't even buy a ticket into the building of the Super Bowl without Saquon Barkley. And they took that chance and rolled the dice, took the risk. Guy's gotten injured more than half of his career, but no, we know how great he can be. And you know what? It paid off. He gave them a full season, a full postseason, and helped them get a Lombardi. And now it doesn't matter if he does anything else for them. It paid off.
Without a doubt. You know, no doubt about it. I mean, Saquon Barkley just put together what has to be one of the best running back seasons of all time. I mean, with his performance yesterday, which, as you mentioned, he didn't even do much yesterday.
No.
But he still finished, when you look at, or when you combine the regular season and the postseason, the most rushing yards ever in NFL history. And that is with yesterday's, let's call it, subpar performance, but they didn't need him with the way the defense was playing, which I'm glad you brought up Vic Fangio, because obviously the MVP award, most valuable player, it goes to a player, but Vic Fangio deserved MVP yesterday because
most valuable person. How about that?
Yeah, he deserved it. That was a absolute masterclass against one of, if not the best offensive play caller in NFL history in Andy Reid, one of the best quarterbacks in NFL history in Patrick Mahomes, and he shut them down. Mahomes, I've never seen Mahomes look so rattled and just uncomfortable back there than he did yesterday. It was one of the worst games. According to EPA, it was the second worst performance of his entire career, Patrick Mahomes.
He was dreadful.
And it came in the Super Bowl, and that was because of Vic Fangio. And when you look at the Eagles' defense last year compared to this year, of course, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, that is a big difference right there. That was a huge boost to the secondary. And I believe it was this last offseason that they also re-signed Gardner Johnson. Correct?
Yes, they brought him back.
So that, is a pretty big overhaul of the secondary right there. But outside of those three guys, I believe the only real key player they added on defense last offseason was Zach Bond.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of that,
who was a nobody.
He
was
signed him.
Nobody. He was a journeyman.
About a month ago, I was talking to my friend who was a big Eagles fan, and he was telling me that when Zach Bond was signed originally by Howie Roseman, the thought was he would be a key special teams player for them.
Mm-hmm.
And it was Vic Fangio that was like, hold up a second. I think I can turn this guy into a great linebacker. And lo and behold, Zach Bond put together an all-pro season. But my point being, yes, they added these three guys to the secondary. Zach Bond was a humongous boost. But the biggest difference between the Eagles defense in 2023 and the Eagles defense in 2024, no doubt about it, is Vic Fangio. He deserves so much credit for what he did to the Eagles defense this year. And of course, same goes to Howie Roseman, because Howie Roseman gave Vic Fangio all of these great players for him to deploy. But I cannot give enough credit to Vic Fangio for what he did to the Eagles defense this year.
All right, so how do you move on from this situation if you're somebody in the NFC East? I just want to bring this up. There are six significant contributors to the Eagles starting lineup and or rotation who are going to be free agents, either because of voided contracts or they are unrestricted free agents. So if you're looking for the Eagles to take a step back, these are the players that they've got to address because they may lose them. Zach Bond, Josh Sweat, Milton Williams, and Avonte Maddox on defense. Okay? I happen to be a huge Milton Williams fan. I was when he came out of school. I thought he'd be an outstanding 3 technique. I was hoping the Giants could grab him. John and I, we talked about him when he was coming out. I was much higher on him than most. Did not do much for the Eagles at the beginning of his career, and now this season had a breakout. He's going to want to be paid. Big time. Especially after yesterday. I believe he had 2 sacks.
Yeah.
Okay. So we will see. I will tell you, if you did not draft, well, draft is going to come after free agency. But if you wanted to knock off defensive tackle from your want list, if you were Team X in free agency, 3 technique, Milton Williams is at the top of that list for me and actually has been. I refrain from talking about him because I know what happens when I talk about guys. Other teams usually get them. But he would be at the top of my free agent list of defensive tackles available. That, of course, assumes the Eagles don't pony up to keep him. I think they might because he's a really good. He's busted out. He showed he's a really good player.
He has, but I feel like they have a good amount of, top tier talent and depth in the interior defensive line.
Good. Let him go.
Where they, as much as they would love to keep him, I think he's going to get too large of a contract for them to be able to re-sign him.
Okay.
I agree, though. I mean, when a couple weeks ago, when you and I were talking about, potential areas that the Giants could address in free agency and who they should target, I said to you, Milton Williams would be my number 1 target among defensive tackles. And frankly...
And I tried to stay quiet. I don't want to put his name out there.
But frankly, after what he did yesterday in the Super Bowl...
Yeah, he's no secret now.
He might be too expensive for the Giants at this point.
Yeah, he could be.
I mean, that performance, he made himself a good amount of money. Because in addition to the 2 sacks, he had the forced fumble, which he also was able to recover himself. The one thing I'll just note is that you talked about those pending free agents for the Eagles. Avonte Maddox barely even played this year. That just goes to show
33%.
That just goes to show
1/3 of the snaps.
I think I don't think he started a single game or only a couple of games.
I'm talking about when I say starter and or rotational player. 33 snaps. If you played at least 1/3 of the snaps, that makes you a significant enough rotational piece where you have to deal with it if you lose them.
I mean, I guess, but they have enough depth in the secondary. I don't think they're.
I'm not saying they don't.
Going to be sweating too much if Avonte Maddox leaves.
These are guys who played at least 1/3 of their snaps who are potentially walking out the door. On offense, and we left this name out, Mekhi Becton, who they picked up off the Jets scrap heap. I mean, really. And look what happened.
Got hurt last night and missed the game pretty much.
But I mean, he was a big part of
for sure
of their entire
season. He
had
a humongous bounce back season.
All right, so Mekhi Becton on offense, as well as Fred Johnson, right guard, who played 41% of the snaps this year for them. Those would be the 2 guys on offense who, again, played at least 1/3 of the snaps, who might escape. So Bourne, Sweat, Williams, Maddox on defense, Johnson, and Becton on offense. Those are the guys who are at least in position to walk out the door. In other words, they're not going to be decimated by free agency.
No,
they're not.
I think of those defensive free agents you just mentioned, the one guy I can't see them ponying up for is Zach Bond, just because of how amazing he played in his first season under Vic Fangio. Again, an all-pro. He deserves a big contract. And
yeah,
the Eagles do have, Nakobe Dean, but he's coming off a season-ending major injury. Of those guys, I mean, obviously, I'm sure they would love to keep Milton Williams, Josh Sweat, and Zach Bond. But I do think the most likely guy I could see them re-signing to a pretty large contract would be Zach Bond. I think Milton Williams and Josh Sweat might have just, frankly, played their way into too large of a contract. Although every year we see Howie Roseman somehow, despite the Eagles having so many high-priced players on their payroll, still finding a way to add these high-priced free agents just about every single year. We talk about it, they kick the can down the road, which when you're contending, that works. You don't have to worry about 3-4 years down the road if you're ready to win a Super Bowl this year. As we've spoken about before, though, eventually you're going to have to, pay the piper on that. But again, especially after just winning the Super Bowl yesterday, that is not something they're concerned about at the moment.
No. Now, they do have Jeremiah Trotter, the son, who is backing up Bourne right now. And, if they should lose Bourne, I guess Trotter probably moves into that spot, I would guess, unless they acquire somebody else. But that's kind of what they have to make a decision in their own heads. What do they think of Trotter, and is he potentially leverage against maybe the kind of money Bourne might want? Because he's going to want to get paid now.
Oh, for
played
sure.
90% of their snaps. He's going to want to get paid.
100%.
Okay. The other interesting part to this is that Bryce Huff did nothing for them. The big free agent that they signed from the Jets was a non-factor. In fact, he was a healthy scratch in the Super Bowl. Now, when you talk about Sweat's a big-time free agent in this market coming up this offseason.
Yep.
He prices himself out depending upon how much bloom is off of Bryce Huff's rose. The Eagles may just say, okay, Sweat, you really need a couple of Brinks trucks? Okay, fine, go ahead. We'll just put Bryce Huff in your spot. They don't have to chase Sweat up the ladder if they think Huff has the opportunity to regain his Jets form. But they may be sour on him after just 1 year because he really was a non-factor.
Yeah, I mean, he only started 6 games, played in, I think it was 12, but 2.5 sacks. I mean, that's certainly not what, they paid him for. They kind of brought Bryce Huff in and sent Hassan Reddick out thinking, oh, we'll just, we'll get Hassan Reddick's production from Bryce Huff, and that did not happen in the slightest bit.
No.
I mean, neither one of those guys had, years to write home about this past season, but nonetheless, Bryce Huff, certainly I would think the Eagles would be somewhat disappointed with the early return they got on him, but he's still a young player. I think he's still an ascending player. I mean, it was only, the 2023 season where he had double-digit sacks for the Jets. Mm-hmm. So there is still a good football player in there. And again, if there's anyone that can get the best out of these young defensive players, it's Vic Fangio.
All right, so why don't we get to the phones in just a second. But before we do, as a reminder, the Giants Huddle podcast is available on all your favorite podcast platforms, as well as Giants.com/podcasts. Pearson, if you wouldn't mind, give us an update on exactly what the latest stuff is up on that platform and what might be coming up this week.
Yep. So this morning I put up the all-star coaches, all the Giants coaches that were down at the Shrine and Senior Bowl. John did interviews with them.
Okay.
And then draft season tomorrow.
With Tony Pauline.
Yep.
Great stuff. All right, that's on the Giants Huddle podcast. With that, we go to the phones at 201-939-4513. And I guess number one is Julian from Florida. You're first on the program. Hello.
How you doing, guys?
Good morning.
Paulie, Matt, good to speak to you again. It's been a while. I think I called you in the beginning of the season when Daniel Jones threw that pick six on the Texans preseason game, and Matt Citak hit us with the let's be positive. Let's try to spin this the best way we can.
I remember.
And Matt, credit to you, Matt. I do give you credit when it's due. You always try to tell us fans to let's stay positive and don't ever change.
I appreciate that.
That being said,
there's always a but.
There's always a but. Well, this year especially, right?
Yeah.
I was born in '91. I've been a Giants fan for all 33, going on 34 this week, years of my life, and was born into being a Giants fan, and obviously, really started paying attention to the game as I got into like 12 years old, 13 years old, whatnot, and was there for the 2007 Super Bowl, 2011, great times. Haven't really experienced anything since that has been sensational, but I have to say this, and someone, again, that's a little younger than obviously you, Paulie, and I wanted to compare, because I think you always speak about some bad times. I think, I don't know whether you said it was the 80s or whatnot. There were some bad times that the Giants went through. But this season was just an absolute rock bottom as far as my experience. Like, winning 3 games, I had never felt like the laughingstock of the league but I can't think of another team that really was the laughing stock of the league with all the memes, all the Saquon stuff. And I really do think that Hard Knocks just made things worse. Because
Julian, you want a piece of candy to chew on? I'm going to ask you a question before you go any further.
Sure.
Can you tell me which NFC East team has won the most Super Bowls in this century? That would be since the 2000 season.
Since the 2000 season, that'd be us.
That is correct. The Giants and Eagles have 2 apiece. Washington and Dallas have none.
Right.
Since the 2000 season. Giants have 2 rings. Eagles now have 2 rings. Congratulations, Philadelphia. You've now tied the Giants since 2000 for the most success in the division. Washington and Dallas, you're still in the rearview mirror.
And
go ahead,
if
Julian.
I'm not incorrect, I believe the Eagles have been to the Super Bowl since 2004 times and lost twice and won twice, correct? Or is it 5 times?
I said 1, 2. How many wins in the division? Giants have 2, Philly has 2.
No,
That's
I know.
all.
I'm actually adding on to your point that they've lost some and we haven't when we gone.
Oh, well, Giants lost in 2000 to Baltimore.
Exactly.
I wasn't even going to the losses. I was simply talking about the jewelry.
There
2-2.
you go. There you
2-2.
go. So, yep, positives. That's hanging out with Matt all the time. You're getting the positives out of all of it, right?
Well, wait, I prefer to be the fact man on this program. I'm all about the facts.
We need one of those too, especially with all the other stuff going on. But I think honestly, and I'm not calling to just sit here and obviously talk about all the bad stuff, but I do want to say it just felt like everything after everything after everything. I mean, just losing Saquon, it's fine. He's going to go to another team. John Mara makes the quote on Hard Knocks that no one can let live down, and now here he is, and come full circle, he wins the Super Bowl. We had the number 1 pick at one point of the year. We win against the Colts, which was can you believe the only game I went to this year was the Colts game, and that was a game we won. Maybe I'm a good luck charm. Who knows? But maybe not, because then we lose the first pick. But Daniel Jones gets cut, for an era that never really took off. And then the final dagger was Eli. I mean, honestly, the only thing I kept telling my entire family, we're all Giants fans, and we said, we have Eli. Him getting into the Hall of Fame is just going to give us that breath of air to just say, you know what, this was all worth it for some reason, and this season, even though it was humiliating. And then, of course, that doesn't happen. So I wanted to ask 2 questions, and I'll let it go here because at the end of the day, I'm going to go with the Citak strategy here, and let's just be positive, right? We got April around the corner. But 2 questions. Paul, for you, number 1, have you ever gone through a season as bad as this one? And I know that you've been through a lot, and you always talk about the times that were terrible.
Yes.
To me, this has to be the worst Giants season, at least for my age group, and I'm sure for Matt's as well. But I wanted to hear from you if you've been through anything worse than this. And number 2, what can this team do? What can we possibly do besides the draft? We have to hit a home run draft. I think Shane had a good draft last year. Drew Phillips, great surprise. All these guys, Tyrone Tracy. What else can we do in free agency? Who can we sign, whether it's a corner, a wide receiver, bridge quarterback? What do you guys feel like you can tell Giants fans? I know that you guys are just, we listen to you every day. We talk to you every day. Tell us what your thoughts are to make us feel a little bit better after this long, long, long freaking season. And I'll leave you with that. Go Giants. I'll bleed blue till I die.
All right, Julian, thanks so much for the call.
Thanks, Julian.
1983 was my first season on the beat. 3-12-1, Bill Parcells' rookie season as a head coach. Over 24 players were on the injured reserve list. It was an absolute torturous season. And that team did not have the kind of young talent that this team has. So, yes, have I been through worse? I have been through worse. And quite frankly, to be honest with you, the disappointment of the 87 season after the 86 team, which is one of the greatest teams of all time, had to deal with the work problem. As you know, in 87, there was the strike. That derailed that team's opportunity to repeat, and there was a great expectation that they would. So that was an angry, frustrating season. I won't say necessarily miserable. It was more angry because It's nothing the team did. It was the work stoppage that ruined the team's opportunity to repeat. That's terrible. Okay, that was horrible. And to be honest, even 91 was a pretty rotten season because Ray Handley took over after Bill Parcells left in the spring after the draft, had cited a physical condition and heart issue and his smoking and everything else, and his doctor advised him maybe he should step aside. So after the draft, Bill stepped aside and they put Ray Handley in charge. And that 91 team, to be frank with you, had Bill Parcells still been head coach, that 91 team was in pretty good shape to contend and possibly repeat as a Super Bowl champion too. And then, of course, there's 2008 when Plexico shot himself, in his sweats at the disco, when we all knew that the 2008 team was better than the 2007 team. They were going to run away with the Lombardi. So I've had some very angry seasons because the expectations were through the roof, and justifiably so. So I don't know if that helps you, Julian, but no, this past season was not the worst season emotionally that I have had to navigate.
I'll say this, Julian. I am around your age. I was born in 92. I'm 32 years old. This was definitely up there among just all around, like, just rough seasons. And you mentioned Hard Knocks. Of course, looking back now, yeah, Hard Knocks kind of made everything, I guess a little bit worse because when Saquon left in free agency, everyone was, as Giants fans, a little hurt. Like, of course, he's got to do what's best for him and his family. Looking back now, seems like he made the smart move. But Hard Knocks just kind of, I guess, glorified his departure and, shined a light that obviously it was the first time that Hard Knocks offseason was ever done. Shined a light on the front office that you just never see. And so that, and having, as you mentioned, having those clips played every single time Saquon scored a touchdown or ran for 100+ yards. Yeah, that, digging the dagger just a little bit further and further each time they showed those clips. So I will say, as someone around the same age as you, Julian, this was definitely one of the roughest overall seasons. However, because I've seen that same sentiment on social media a whole lot, for months, but especially these last couple of weeks, and especially last night after the Eagles dominated and won the Super Bowl with Saquon having the year that he did. But I will say this, I genuinely believe this. You mentioned I'm optimistic, and I do try to be a little optimistic because in my mind, I'm like, why focus just on all the negatives? That's not going to help anyone. That's not going to help the situation. Try to focus on the positives and see how you can develop those positives and, kind of water them and help it expand to more areas of the team. So I will say the Giants have some young pieces on the team. Not nearly enough, but they have some young core pieces that'll be around hopefully for a very long time that the front office can build the rest of the roster around. Again, they need a lot more players added to those group, but last year's draft class looks like it could be potentially 5, long-term starters for the Giants, and that's combining with, not as many hits, but some hits in the previous couple of drafts. So as Joe Shade mentioned in an interview sometime last week, it's not like the cupboard is completely bare. It's not. It needs a lot more, no doubt about it, starting with the quarterback. But there are some pieces to build around that can help bring this Giants team back to where we all want it to be.
Don't take our word for it. Bill Polian, the Hall of Fame front office executive, was just on the radio the other day. He works with Sirius XM, as you know, part-time. He was just on the other day, and he flat out said the Giants are not nearly as bad off as everybody seems to believe. He said flat out. He goes, there is a lot of pieces there and a lot of young, talented pieces, and you're going to see that they are not nearly as bad off as people perceive. And I believe he's right. That's what Joe Shane tried to tell everybody back at the bye.
Yeah.
And continues to try to tell people. Now, here's what I think, Julian, and I'm going to make this quick because we got other calls. Quarterback, defensive tackle, offensive line, cornerback, and wide receiver. Are we okay with those 5 areas that you'd like to shore up?
Repeat that one more time.
Quarterback, defensive tackle, offensive line, cornerback, and wide receiver. You'd like to get some fortification at those 5 spots, yes?
Yes, I would also add safety, but yes.
Because we don't know about Pinnock.
Yeah, exactly.
We just don't know. Okay. But I think it goes without saying these 5 spots are spots you'd like to address in this offseason, one way or the other. And if there are going to be more, well, circumstances can change. Maybe Pinnock comes back and that's not as big of an issue. Maybe Pinnock doesn't come back and it becomes a bigger issue.
Same kind of with wide receiver and Darius Slayton. If Darius Slayton comes back, wide receiver is not as big of a need as it currently is. Agreed.
My problem is I think he's going to get a rich deal, and I think he's more likely to leave than Pinnock.
I agree with that. I think he's more likely to get a big deal from another team. Yeah,
exactly.
I'm with you.
Okay. So, having said that, here's where your optimism needs to lie. Quarterback, there's going to be quality quarterbacks available in either trade or free agency that are going to have the ability to get you out of this mess. Now, they may not pull you all the way out of the quicksand, but they'll get you at least halfway out. There's reasons to believe the Giants can be a better team because their quarterback situation will be better in 2025. And I think free agency and the trade market, we just heard another veteran, as you probably were aware of the report by Schefter earlier this weekend, that it looks like the Rams and Stafford are having issues coming to terms on a redoing of his deal. And if they can't work that out, he will likely be dealt. So that would be another available veteran in addition to potentially Cousins, maybe Derek Carr. Throw those 3 names onto the crop of free agent guys already available, and suddenly, as I put up on Twitter the other day, this trade and free agent quarterback market is going to have a bigger impact on the 2025 NFL season than the draft class of quarterbacks will. And I would put my feet in cement on that. That is a guaranteed lock. I'm telling you right now.
Well, yeah, I agree because this quarterback class in the draft is just not considered to be,
correct.
That great. There's
Correct.
Obviously the top 2 guys who seem more and more likely to be top 5 picks each day we get closer to the draft. But I will say there are some, guys that are going to go day 2 at the quarterback position that, given time to develop under a veteran, maybe for like a year or 2, I think could develop into starters in the NFL. But for the 2025 season, agree completely.
Much more dramatic impact on this year coming up.
Yes.
With the trade and free agency class. So you're going to get somebody there, I believe, Julian. So don't worry about that. There's plenty on the shelf. Wide receiver, as personnel and scouts have told me for more than 30 years, you can always find some help at wide receiver. In fact, wide receiver and defensive back, more often safeties. But those are the 2 positions that you can find more off the shelf in free agency. Remember when the Giants scapped up Fabian Moreau a couple of years ago? And he wound up starting for an entire season for a playoff team. You can find guys like that. Not necessarily stars. I'm not talking about stars per se. But you can always find guys that can plug in and help you be a winning team. So they'll get a receiver if Slayton leaves. They'll get somebody. I'm not too worried about that. Defensive tackle, it's a great draft for defensive tackles, right? We know that.
Yep.
So they should be able to draft one at some point. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So we agree about the quarter. We agree about the DT, wide receiver. I don't know if you necessarily agree with that, but I think you'll find somebody who's going to be okay. They may not be great.
When it comes to the wide receiver position, this year in particular, this offseason, yes, there are, some of the big name free agents or guys that we think will hit free agency, T. Higgins, although he's going to get a monster contract.
Forget the superstars.
Chris Godwin, coming off of a major injury, but still very talented. Like there are DeAndre Hopkins, there's some veteran players on the slightly older side that are going to be free agents.
I keep seeing on the web that Diggs keeps getting mentioned to the Giants too because of the Buffalo connection.
Stephon Diggs, although again coming off a major injury,
I know.
But still, not too old. But
they'll find a receiver.
But in addition to those free agents, already there was a report over the weekend that Deebo Samuel got permission to look for a trade. We already know Cooper Kupp is in the same position. He announced that the Rams are going to trade him. And then every offseason we see one or two receivers that no one even expected to get dealt.
Yeah.
All of a sudden end up on a new team. If you tell me that someone like DK Metcalf might get traded this offseason, I would not be surprised in the slightest. So those are the veterans that could all potentially be acquired this offseason. And that doesn't even touch on the wide receivers in the draft, which last year's draft, definitely more talent at the wide receiver position. But the Giants obviously, hit a home run with their wide receiver selection last year. I don't think anyone's going to argue that.
No doubt.
But there are other wide receivers in this year's draft, perhaps on, day two. We've spoken about some. We don't have to go through the list of prospects.
The key is they got their slot receiver already, and they got their number one.
Yes.
So you're only looking for a guy who's a number two.
A number two outside receiver.
Maybe. We don't know about Slayton. But maybe you're looking for a number two. You're not looking for a starting slot or a starting one.
Yeah.
That makes it easier.
100%.
Okay. So they should be able to fill their three positions with the marketplace or the draft. Offensive line, I'm a huge Carmen Brasillo guy. I think he's the most valuable transaction they made at offensive line this past year. I believe even more than getting Illuminor, more than getting Runyon, more than picking up Stinney. Getting Carmen Brasillo in this building was their most valuable offensive line acquisition, in my opinion. And so I think he will continue his success story, and I think the O-line will be better next year. And whatever they acquire, I trust him. We know that Andrew Thomas is expected back, so that in itself should improve the line. And a healthy Evan Neal maybe for a full season will help improve the line. I think there's reason to think the O-line will get better.
Yeah, look, I've said it on the show so many times. The first 6 weeks of the season before Andrew Thomas got hurt, the O-line had taken such a big step from what it was in 2023. And again, it was only 6 games, but in those 6 games, the starting offensive line played every single snap together. And then, as we've seen in the past, Andrew Thomas went down, and then, the dominoes started falling and things kind of fell apart. But I will say, I agree with you about Carmen Brasillo, because while you look at the overall season as a whole for the offensive line, it doesn't look great. But John Michael Schmitz, Evan Neal, Josh Azudu, 3 of, the young offensive linemen, or 3 of among the group, they all took steps in the right direction in 2024. Maybe not, as big of steps as we all would have, ideally hoped for, but they all took steps in the right direction. If they continue that trajectory, 2025, especially like John Michael Schmitz and Evan Neal, if he gets an extended opportunity to at least compete for a starting position, the steps that they took under Carmen Brasillo this past season, I expect them to take another step next year.
Yeah.
And then they could get to a position where we're feeling a lot better about those guys and the offensive line as a whole. But it is a position that there will need to be players added. I mean, we've spoken about how a swing tackle is going to be crucial, because we cannot afford, if Andrew Thomas or Illuminor goes down again, we can't afford for the offensive line to sort of fall apart like it did.
Give Brasillo a piece of clay that he can mold.
Exactly. That could be a veteran. That could be a guy maybe day 2 in the draft. There are many different ways to address it, but a swing tackle and then more depth on all across the line is got to be,
no doubt,
one of the top priorities.
No doubt. And to be honest, remember, David Deal was a 5th-round pick. I would trust Carmen Brasillo to say, hey, if there's a 4th-rounder that he really likes, go get him. All right. Corner's the other spot. That's the one that's a little thin. Little thin in the draft, thin in the top of free agency. I'm not sure how the Giants will enhance their corner spot. They want to. They need more depth there. They need to help that position along. That's the one that, to me, I don't have as much optimism that they'll be able to greatly improve. But the other 4 spots out of the 5, I see no reason why the Giants will not be better in 25 than they were in 24.
Yeah, just about, at the quarterback position, for me, obviously, quarterback is the top priority. As we all know, we've spoken about it many, many times, and I expect them to add a veteran in free agency along with someone in the draft at some point. However, for me, the very first position I'm looking to address if I'm the Giants in free agency is corner. And I'm going out there and I'm trying to get one of the top 2 corners that are supposed to hit the free agent market in a month from now, Travarius Ward or DJ Reed. Mm-hmm. I want one of those 2 to be a New York Giant come week 1 of the 2025 season because we need corners. As you just said, it's just
is
plain and simple.
Is Aaron Glenn letting DJ Reed walk out of the Jets locker room?
That we'll have to see. I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't know if they'll be able to afford him though. But not only do we need a top corner just to help the room in general, but I think adding a veteran that can sort of show Deonte Banks, show Drew Phillips, Cordell Flott, kind of show them the ropes and show them how to develop into solid, reliable NFL cornerbacks. That I think that would be the most valuable thing the Giants can do for the defense this offseason. So cornerback would be my number 1 priority in free agency.
All right, we go to the phones. Jason in New Haven, you're next on the program. Hello.
Hey, man, Paul, how you guys doing?
Hello,
Good.
how are you?
Jason?
Good, man. Thanks for taking my call. So I'm with you. I'm kind of with you, Paul. I know the last caller mentioned one of the worst seasons, and this season has been rough. For me, Paul and Matt, I would say that 2008 season, when Plax had that incident, I really thought as well we were at least, conference bound, championship bound that year. So that one was hard because we was right there, and unfortunately, it just kind of all fell apart.
It sure did.
This year, I didn't have major expectations. I was just kind of in a wait and see. Let's see how we do. And I went to the first game, the Minnesota game, and I know the first game's always hard, but we try to throw out the window. But we didn't look good in that game, and it was definitely some the run game and lack of upper echelon quarterback play that held us back, and it seemed to show throughout this season. But to move forward, yesterday, what can we say? The Eagles put on a clinic, and it really reminded me of that 2007 team. Now we had different teams. The Eagles this year, post 2007, they have a way more explosive offense. I don't believe we had anybody that year outside of Plax, and he was banged up. But their D-line yesterday really won them the game. Mahomes, dare I say, looked shell-shocked yesterday a lot of the game.
It was awful.
He couldn't get he just couldn't get comfortable. He couldn't get his feet set. It seemed like every time he hit his third step, there was a defender in his face, and he had to duck and dive, and the Eagles defense is just too athletic for him, and they just kind of swallowed that offense up. I was shocked by it. I didn't see that coming, but kudos to the Eagles for doing that. And that leads us to what we've been talking about, Paul and Matt. And, with you, Paul, I'm sure Matt agrees too. It really does start at the lines. I know everybody's hyper-focused on the QB. And in our situation, yes, we do need a quarterback infusion, a talent infusion in a major way, whether that be bridge and or drafting a quarterback, which I think would do both. I don't think there's a way around it. But I always tell people quarterbacks doesn't necessarily – they can lose you a game on their own, but on their own, a quarterback can never win you a game. And we saw that yesterday. Hurts didn't do anything. He
was really good.
Efficient game, no doubt about it.
Yeah,
but
Jason, he was really good, and Mahomes was really bad. And that's apart from how the rest of the teams played. I mean, the thing, Jason, give me half a second. I want to keep you here. I want to keep you right here. But 1 second, and I think it's interesting. My daughter called me this morning, and she said to me, Dad, just watching that game last night, Mahomes, it looked like he just wasn't himself. And I said, you know why you said that? You said that because we've become used to watching him for the last 4 years of be a magician. He has been making plays above the X's and the O's as if they are routine. Right. And that's what the great players do. The elite players constantly make chicken salad out of chicken doo-doo because that's what makes them so special. Yesterday, Mahomes was human. He played a terrible game when he was getting destroyed because his offensive line didn't have it. And it's the first time I can remember seeing him because, we only watch Kansas City, 6 times a year because they're on TV, 6 times a year, 7 times a year. It's the first time I can ever remember him being under such a barrage and looking human. It's like when Mariano Rivera would blow a save, right? We're so used to the guy being a magician. When he actually looks human and looks like every other quarterback in the league that, when he gets pressured, he crumbles. That's what made us so shocked, right?
Right. I mean, he looked, it really reminded me of that 2007 game we had against Brady where that offense, people don't remember how great that 2007 offense was. Like if they'd have won, they'd have been the greatest regular season NFL team in history. And Brady just didn't look himself that he couldn't get comfortable. And the same thing happened with Holmes. So I'm going to just tie this in because I know you got other callers. The draft, Paul and Matt, I've stated it before. I'm fine with either the quarterbacks. Ward probably would get the nod if it's even keel. I'm a big Milroe fan. I don't think he'll go that high. But I'm a Milroe fan if you get him in a second. So I'm not disputing the quarterback play. But, we need these lines fixed. And we did a good job. I think last year our O-line was serviceable. I really do. I didn't think they were that bad compared to what we've been the last few years. I think they was a capable unit, but there's nothing wrong to add to it. And the D-line, like I'll say again, I've been stating since the last few years, always improve that D-line because as we saw yesterday, I mean, the Eagles really went 8 deep. I mean, it was incredible how they shut the Chiefs down. So, listen, if the quarterbacks aren't there, I know we love Travis Hunter, but hey, if Abdul Carter's there too, I mean, I wouldn't be mad at that. In the second and third round, hey, the best player available is a D tackle or a guard. Pick up another guard or pick up another D tackle, and let's get these lines going. So,
thank you, Jason.
You guys, and go Giants. We are not as bad as everybody's making us to be.
You and Bill Polian ought to have breakfast because you guys agree. Thank you, Jason. We got to run.
Right.
Be good. 201-939-4513. If we can take 1 or 2 more quickies, we will do so.
I just want to touch on, I'm glad he brought this up because this is kind of what I was referring to before when I said, kudos to Howie Roseman because he got his quarterback in 2020 and then built around him the following drafts after that. I pulled it up. 2021 in the NFL draft, the Eagles took Landon Dickerson in the round 2 and Milton Williams in round 3. The following year, Jordan Davis, defensive tackle in round 1, Cam Jurgens, offensive line in round 2. The year at 2023, Jalen Carter in round 1. They traded up to take Nolan Smith, defensive end, at the end of the round 1, and then Tyler Steen, offensive line, in round 3.
Trenches.
Even this past year,
trenches.
We talked about, the Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Well, then they took Jalex Hunt in round 3, who played well throughout the postseason as a rookie. It just goes to show, yes, it's a lot easier once you have the quarterback position settled, but 3 straight drafts, Howie Roseman spent pretty high draft capital on the trenches, both sides, every single year. And look how it paid out. Won the Super Bowl because of the trenches.
All right, let's try to get a couple more quick ones in. Donnie from Queens, you're next on the program. Hello.
Hey, guys. Long time no speak. Hope you had a happy new year.
You too.
You too.
Just looking at the Super Bowl, you guys kind of touched on some of the things I wanted to say. But, and really, Matt, what you just went through it, obviously quarterback is its own thing, but it's about the trenches. And you just went through Philly's draft record. I don't believe we drafted an offensive lineman last year. I think we were the only team not to draft an offensive or defensive lineman in the draft. He has not drafted a defensive tackle, I don't believe, other than Jordan Riley in the 7th round. Look at the shape of the defensive, tackle room next to Dexter. So to me, the offseason is about, rebuilding those things. Obviously quarterback, but rebuilding. The offensive line needs more. The defensive front needs more run stoppers. We've got the edges that can get upfield. But, they're not necessarily strong in terms of stopping the run. So you have to earn the right to get to the passer. And Matt, just real quick, it wasn't really the reason I called, but to me, guys like Ward and Reed, those are the exact mistakes the Giants have been making that have gotten them in this position is signing guys at positions of need in free agency, the big contracts that are older players that, those guys are going to be 28, 29 years old. They don't fit the timeline. The Giants may not be as bad as everybody thinks they are. Maybe they're not as bad as a 3-win team, but they're not anywhere near ready to compete. So like Matt Stafford and these types of Band-Aid moves don't help. They have to they have to take their medicine and get players that fit timelines, that can be here for 3, 4, 5 years, as opposed to trying to slap something together that can get you to 8 wins and respectability. To me, that's trying to keep your job, not doing the best thing for the future of the Giants. So I know you guys want to take other calls, so I'll hop off and listen. Thanks.
Donnie, in short, the mantra is you don't want to be desperate, because when you're desperate for a certain position, you will overpay. And that's the danger that you must avoid, which is why I said to him, and Matt would agree with this, you don't want to overpay. You don't just, I don't think, unless I read you wrong, you're not saying go get a corner in free agency at all costs, are you?
No.
I didn't think so.
No, because it's not like the Giants have unlimited cap space to spend.
No.
But if you're going to hand out a big contract, and I respect your opinion, Donnie, but I still believe getting a veteran to lead and help, mentor all of the young defensive backs the Giants currently have in their room, because they have an incredibly young DB room, guys that are going to be called upon to play pretty significant snaps next season, between Deontay Banks, Drew Phillips, Cordell Flott, Tyler Nubin. Those are just 4, but those are going to be 4 of the top defensive backs. Having a veteran in that room to help these guys grow, that's going to help you both in the present and in the future. And I'm not saying, go out and give DJ Reed a, 5-year, $100 million contract. That's insane. But if you can get one of those 2 guys on, a 3-year deal, a reasonably priced 3-year deal, I don't see what the downside is. That, like, you're right. As I said before, I don't expect the Giants in 2025 to be Super Bowl contenders. But if that corner is there for 3 years, and again, both of those guys are only 28. It's not like they're on the wrong side of 30 years old and I'm saying to bring them in. They are 28 years old. They're in their prime right now. They still have a couple of good years of football left. And you talked about, the Giants timeline. I hear you, but I would hope that within the next 3 years, the Giants are at a level where they are contending, at least, playoff contenders on a consistent basis. May not happen this year, but at the very least, I'd hope by 2026, the Giants are in a position where they're going to be contending for the playoffs. And that's would be, year 2 of this proposed three-year deal that I'm saying. So I think there are benefits both to the present and the future for adding a veteran in at the cornerback position, mainly being that, yes, it's a position of need, and you're supposed to address free agency with the positions in need so you can go take the best players available in the draft. But I just really think having a guy like Travarius Ward or DJ Reed is going to help someone like Deontay Banks' development so much.
Well, I think the other thing we have to keep in mind is that there's a little bit of an overturn in the coaching staff here this year as well.
Including the defensive backs coach.
Yes. Now, I think I speak for everybody who does this program. We have tremendous respect for Jerome Henderson.
Yep.
Huge fans of Jerome Henderson. He's no longer here. So, the Giants have made a change there. We have to see how the secondary responds to the new voice. I mean, that's just part of what happened with the Eagles. Changed their staff. They went down in 23, changed their staff. They went up in 24. Sometimes people are a little bit unaware of how much of a factor that could truly be. So,
yeah.
In any event, and of course, Shane Bowen is still back as the defensive coordinator, and he now knows more about the roster and about his players. He needs to make some tweaks himself in what he does with the scheme.
No doubt about it.
And he knows that.
And he is going to get an influx of talent in some capacity, because as we mentioned, the only, key defensive free agent that the Giants are, potentially going to lose, at least from the starting side, would be Jason Pinnock. There's some other depth pieces, guys that played, like Adoree Jackson, played a good amount of snaps as a reserve he's also going to be a free agent. But in terms of starters, it's just Jason Pinnock. And whatever the Giants do this offseason, I will guarantee that there will be both free agents and draft capital spent on the defensive side of the ball. I feel like that's pretty safe to say. So he's going to have more talent to work with as well. And it'll be, for most of the guys, year 2 playing in Shane Bowen's system, which you always hope to see some growth and development the second year in a system.
Guys, that'll do it for this edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. So glad you could join us. Once again, we're here live every weekday from 12:30 p.m. till 1:30 p.m. in the afternoon. And, of course, you can always check us out on your favorite podcast platforms everywhere, as well as Giants.com/podcasts. Again, write down the number 201-939-4513. For Matt Citak, I'm Paul Dottino. We'll see you again tomorrow right here on Big Blue Kickoff Live, presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Football Giants. So long, everybody.